everybody, and welcome to our first year two episode of the GROGPod Roguelike podcast, where most of the time for each episode that you tune in for this, we reach into our big burlap sack of rogue-style games. We dust one off and give it a nice flavor taste here. And we try to rank that flavor of that rogue game as best we can against all the other ones that we've tasted and sampled from. I am your host of the podcast, Scott Berger, which, according to the Berlin interpretation of podcast hosts, features permadeath, randomness, and grid-based movement. Joining me in the synonyms section of Webster's Dictionary are my podcast co-hosts.
Hi, it's Colin. I'm an @ symbol, and I'm looking for the treasure.
And Andrew Harshman here, putting the ass in ASCII graphics from old school dungeon crawlers of old.
And this is Will Wright, the source of truth on all things roguelike, rogue-lite, and related.
Well, the first thing that we have to do is to thank our surly crew here for making it this far, let alone making it past the threshold of podcasts dying out after 3 or 4 episodes. But second year, we've done it. We've crossed the Rubicon.
Woo!
And in that process, we've wind up covering a pretty broad range of video games thus far. Everything from things that are more on kind of the traditional end of the spectrum and things that could barely be considered inclusive of the genre. But I think that's what this show is all about, is being casting as big of a net as we possibly can and stuffing as many goodies into our Halloween treat bag of video games that we can. So that brings us to our special topic today. Normally we talk about a game, but today we're talking about everyone's favorite thing, the most divisive topic in alt.nerd.obsessive. What is a roguelike game? And so maybe to set goals here for this episode, Colin, this was your idea. What do we hope to achieve by answering the question of what is a roguelike?
Well, I mean, I feel like, honestly, I want to achieve more what is a roguelite, because I feel like we're going to converge pretty quickly on what a roguelike is. But I feel like there is a broad genre of game that we all enjoy, and it is ill-served by the name roguelite, and it is ill-defined, and I think it's interesting to explore where that boundary is and what it is that puts the edge of that Venn diagram on it.
Yeah, I think whenever we cover a game, I like to always have a little segment of the story of this game begins. And I think the story of the header section that I have in the Google Doc says, who cares, right? Like, why do we care? No one cares about what an FPS is or what a Doom-like is. Maybe we'll get there in a minute. But who really cares? And this was actually very serendipitous, because maybe like a day or two ago, some poor innocent little lamb stumbled into the roguelike Discord channel and was like, hey guys, what is a roguelike game? And I was furiously taking notes down. And as the wolves circled in, I mean, like, this is kind of a common thing that happens, right? It's like someone's like, oh, I really like this game, Vampire Survivors. I'd love to learn what are some other games like this. I know, I'll go to the roguelike Discord or the roguelike subreddit channel or something, and then have a giant hammer crushed upon their skull. I think and the reason why is because, those kinds of communities have a kind of preset definition of what they think a roguelike game is, versus mainstream enjoyers of various games that have those mechanics might think. And then, like you were saying, Colin, the two are kind of clashing in this Venn diagram overlap zone. Is that fair to say? Has everyone else had that kind of similar experience?
No, never. I was unaware that there is this big contentious like debate going on, and frankly, it boggles my mind that people would get upset about this at all, because it's just like many things in philosophy. It's like, yes, there's the very strict definition. Do I know I have a hand? And then there's like the, well, in common conversation, I know I have a hand.
Will, you're so wrong about your own self. Kenny Rogers is the best jazz musician. All jazz is the same.
That's the chicken guy, right?
Sure, yeah. All jazz is just saxophones, right?
Right, and for most people who aren't into jazz, that's totally acceptable. Most people aren't into like the specific games that we're into, and so most people aren't into gaming. I think that's a fair statement. And so when you say, "Oh, roguelike," like that's going to be a general statement that means everything that is having to do with, I think, just random chance, I think is what a lot of people mean by that. So there's a lot of just people with just get the definition wrong, and it doesn't really matter until you're talking to the people that really care.
Well, or until you're trying to recommend a game. You're like, oh, I liked this game, and then they recommend Cogmind. Like, is that a good recommendation or not, based off of other things that maybe
you do that on similarity of features, though. You wouldn't look at like the broad classification of it. You look at like what about the game was actually fun. I think a discussion about like the nature of fun, I'm gonna put that on the list of things to talk about here, because this conversation, I have two definitions. They're the perfect definitions, and then we'll move on. I think that's as quick as that.
We'll save that for hour 3 of the podcast. But yeah, maybe
let's. To answer your question, Scott, I haven't encountered this specific argument, but I have seen very many throughout different fandoms, different layers of corners of geekery, fierce discussions and debates about definitions of genres and things. And I would hope, at least the reason that I like to participate in such conversations is just kind of, for the fun of it, for the, hey, we all enjoy this similar genre of thing. Let's have a spirited, fun conversation, and hopefully in so doing, learn something more about our appreciation for that thing. But you're saying that there's people like really getting very intense about it, you say?
Yeah, I mean, and I think no fault to the communities that maybe want to protect what they think their definition of a thing is. And maybe we're like, this could be generalized to basically any kind of not extreme fandom, but dedicated fandom, we'll say, where someone comes in and says, hey, I'm interested in this thing. My understanding of this thing is something that's like very mainstream and like not like as deep into the weeds as this super niche community would think. What's your guys' thoughts? And I feel like the immediate response is hostility for the most part, in that, well, let's take it for a roguelike example here. Take it for a walk. Someone comes in and says, hey, roguelike community that's been established for a while. Big fan of Vampire Survivors. What other games should I look into? And the first response that they will inevitably get is, oh, well, that's a roguelite, not a roguelike. And
very useful response.
Yeah, exactly. So, which we'll get into in a little bit, like whether or not that's true, but it comes off as a very sort of dismissive, you're in the wrong place, bucko approach.
I mean, they were in the wrong place, though, right?
Well, how are they supposed to know, though, right? I mean, if someone is like a mainstream, like, let's say Call of Duty player their whole life, and they like, hey, Fred, you got to check out this game. It's $3 on Steam, and you just walk around with a single joystick, and it does all the work for you. I'm like, sure, okay, why not? Oh my God, this game is amazing, and it like I'm completely addicted to it. I want to learn more about this. What'd you say it was? A roguelike? Okay, sure. Type. Maybe these people will have some info for me. Slap. Oh, now where do I go to hunt for stuff?
Why not go to the Vampire Survivor subreddit and see?
Well, yeah, that's a great point. So, I think that there's two kind of splits here. One is the generic old school, we'll say like pre-2008 roguelike community. and then anything after Spelunky. I think this is not entirely all the Spelunky developers' fault, but I think that kind of cracked the egg open of now these games that are much more commercially successful have a much bigger following individually than like the pre-2008 ASCII tile rogue games. And like that's where those communities live, right? So yeah, you're right. Like someone should go to the Vampire Survivor subreddit or Discord or what have you and say, this game is dope. Give me some recommendations, please. And they might get something more, maybe more relevant to their interests versus coming to a community that just says it's turn here off the highway to Roguesville. You're like, that sounds like me. Wait a minute, these games are totally different than what I was expecting. But they say roguelike on the cover. What's the deal? I think that's where one of maybe two major contention points for Colin's Venn diagram overlap are. Then the other one we'll get to is maybe meta progression. But
yeah. Well, and I feel like the problem is that I feel like the term roguelike was at one point probably pretty descriptive of a very specific type of game. And now you probably can't really use that term. You probably would need to use traditional roguelike.
Is it all Steam's fault?
I mean, no. I think it's Steam's fault, but I think it's also just like the popularity of the larger genre. Like most of the games that like look at something like Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is not a traditional roguelike, but it does share some aspects, and like it's better than traditional roguelikes, and that's probably
amen, brother.
I mean, like
in our opinion,
no, it just is. No, I'm sorry, no, but in our opinion, or just like I like that. I like Slay the Spire a lot, and I could see people being like, I want to explore every possible game that's even close to this because I somehow went from Call of Duty, Slay the Spire, and now I'm like, oh my God, my mind is opened. And I need all of the roguelike games. And they're like, I mean, yeah, you can't really say that. And like, Slay the Spire is not a old school traditional roguelike. That describes a little bit more restrictive of a term. And if you just use that term for everything, then you have to create a new term. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, or just in the world.
All right, so let's uncork this this bottle here while we're at it. What do we think our one sentence description each is for what we think a roguelike game is? Colin, you go first. This is all your fault.
Top-down, tile-based, permadeath with true loss game.
Sure. Will?
This isn't gonna sync up so well, but yeah, the very short summary is like the game Rogue.
Ooh. Well, I thought I had come up with the shortest and simplest explanation, which is like, if you want to get real technical, if you want to get real pedantic, I think all it takes is impactful, meaningful gameplay defining randomization, and that the other sort of key aspects that you think of normally in, like, say, the Berlin interpretation are simply things that organically come out of good game design and are just a byproduct of the core definition.
Maybe we'll circle off the Zoom windows here back to me. I think my one sentence description is a game with run-based randomized play experiences where each attempt feels fresh or unique in some way. So there we go. We've solved it.
Boom.
Thanks for listening. Podcast is over. Let me just check the timestamp on here from the future. Oh, we have another 2.5 hours left. Okay, great.
Rip.
Okay, so we've talked about mechanics of things. We've all played maybe at least 2 or 3 minutes of the original Rogue game, right?
I've watched YouTube videos of it.
Oh, I played it and I got to level 10. So has anyone else gotten a level 10?
I was very excited. There was a computer history museum exhibit going on in Soto a couple weekends ago. And I thought, this is excellent timing. I'm going to go there. They're going to have all sorts of bizarre, ancient Unix terminal machines there. And I guarantee at least one of them will have Rogue installed on it. I'm going to go there. I'm going to ask, hey, one of these has got Rogue on it, right? Can I fumble around with it? I asked one of the exhibitor guys, and he's like, well, it's got this other obscure game from 1979 on it. And I was like,
Is it Pong?
It's obscure.
Yeah. They did have a flight simulator thing that looked about the level of potato graphics that my computer runs Microsoft Flight Simulator on. So, but yeah, I think we're in this episode comparing things that, so the word of the day is roguelike. And Rogue was a game back in 1980, which is what, almost 50 years ago or something? Is that how math works?
Wow.
43 years ago.
43 years ago, which I had a note somewhere written down that was like the time between now and the original Rogue is like on par with when the original Rogue launched and like the Turing machine.
Wait,
yeah.
Is that the original roguelike is the Turing?
Yeah. 43 years before Rogue was like the Great Depression.
Wow, that's
pretty wild. It was like Hoop and Stick was the hot new game.
Hoop-lite. But yeah, incidentally, like one of Alan Turing's earliest papers was like, could computing machines be used for entertainment and gaming purposes? I'm like, wow, he really was like 100 years ahead of his time, wasn't
on
he?
it.
But yeah, so Rogue, the original one from 1980, something that really can only be experienced in its full glory on a machine with yellowing plastic and a kind of hot fan heat coming out the back that really just has a kind of carcinogenic nostalgia to it. And it has to be on a CRT. Is a game where you are an @ symbol and you are moving around squares of rooms with other letters in them that represent monsters, and you bump into them to kill them. Rogue.
Indeed, and crucially, right out of the gate, you have a huge list of commands of different interactions and things that you can do, such as Q for quaff potion, and R for read, and the like. Pretty exciting stuff.
And I think the key differentiator here at the time was that the other big game at the time was Adventure in 1980, which if you thought of like something that looked like the NES version of Legend of Zelda, but from
the
like
Atari version of Zelda. Holy moly.
That was kind of the reigning champ at the time, and then along comes Rogue, and like this adventure game is like it's like what you would expect from a Zelda game. It's very like point A to point B, you do this thing, and it's like very scripted. Whereas Rogue was like, oh, it's different every single time. You mean I can't just follow a strategy guide to say that when I talk to this guy here, I should select this option and I win the game? It was like at the time, randomness was like the key differentiator. It may look, a little bit the same to some of those other games, but that was it. And I think that's kind of where our story truly begins. And then we get the first roguelikes, which, let's see if I remember off the top of my head, Moria and I'm gonna get crucified for not knowing the other one.
Angband.
Which one?
Angband later.
Great name. My next D&D character name for sure.
So yeah, you have these games that are like, oh, this is interesting, and people forking that idea into their own system, creating the first world of roguelikes, and then way predating any of our use of the internet, people saying like, oh, this is cool stuff. We want an area to discuss this. Let's go to Usenet, everyone's favorite tool of the day, and discuss these games. Well, what are these games? Well, they're like Rogue, but are they? Even at the time, there's some great articles about how even back then people were like, no, it's not like Rogue, because you have a central town and you have a shopkeep. That's not like Rogue. So even in the very beginning, it was contentious of people saying like, well, okay, this game that to us nowadays is functionally identical to 1980s version of Rogue. Back then, people were like, nah. And then I guess like it kind of trugged along a little bit until around 2008, where we got the aforementioned Berlin interpretation, which has a laundry list of like, here are the things that a Rogue game needs to have. If it doesn't have it, forget it. It's not worth discussing as part of the conversation. These include things like random environment generation, permadeath, turn-based, grid-based, non-modal. You can do everything at any time. Complex strategy, resource management, hack and slash gameplay, exploration and discovery. Other things like having a single player character versus many. Monsters are similar to players in how their stats and attributes are laid out. It has tactical challenge, an ASCII display. It has to have dungeons, and it has to have a combat log with numbers that are deliberately shown. Tick, 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 tick. This has become, I think, an anchor that is holding the discussion back some.
And who gave Berlin all this authority? This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah, let me tell you, I've been to Berlin. They don't know what they're doing. They're like, oh, we're gonna have like a fairly functional like public transportation system. Oh, we're gonna have the most vegan restaurants per capita. Come on, it's just a bunch of kookiness going on over there. And yeah, looking at this list of definitions, I was not familiar with this Berlin interpretation situation until recently. It is so granular and so specific. ASCII graphics, give me a break. Like this interpretation is like saying like, oh, in order to be a platformer game, like you must jump on vaguely mushroom shaped aesthetic squares, and you must play an Italian plumber. Like
you can't jump on walls because that's not a platform.
It's way too specific. Yeah, no, we can't have that.
It's a wall jumper now.
Yeah.
So if you have Rogue and then if you just had a new tile set on top of Rogue, then the Berlin definition here would say that Rogue is not a roguelike game if you just have a different tile set, which is just this is why they fail.
Like Rimworld style graphics on it, or
yeah, so they just fail. So we can just throw them out right now because that's just stupid.
Well, I'm starting to think that this, this definition is similar to the description of Brotato's storyline that's on the Nintendo eShop. Just like some random person like made it up. Or do we know where this came from? Like, was there an actual like roguelike summit?
There was a game? I mean, effectively the same thing. I'm guessing it was well, so yeah, there's wiki pages and stuff about it, and I think like it has only grown in popularity over time for people to defend the old style of turn-based, grid-based permadeath RPGs, which I think we can collectively agree on as traditional roguelikes, to use the Berlin interpretation as like a firewall to say, no, over here are roguelikes because we came first, and anything after 2008 that involves real-time gameplay, it's not the same game. Like, yeah, you can borrow elements from our genre, but it feels like a very walled garden, deliberately exclusive approach to say Spelunky does not belong in the same conversation as like NetHack, for example.
So like I agree with you for the most part. Because like for me, I'm looking at like when I made my weird matrix of what roguelike games are, I would put Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon. Pretty high on the like rogue-like category in terms of randomness and all that stuff. But you play them in a very different way. Like, I didn't particularly like Enter the Gungeon because I'm bad at like top-down stick shooter games. That is not relevant for playing Cogmind. My ability to point quickly at something with a controller is immaterial to my ability to play Cogmind or any of the traditional roguelikes. Like, Rogue requires no skill. Like, you could play Rogue with, you could be a quadriplegic playing Rogue with a pencil in your mouth and be significantly better at it than me. Versus you could not play Hades or Enter the Gungeon.
There's a lot less focus on like reactionary like physical like user input skill. It's like entirely tactical based.
It's mental skill versus physical skill.
Right.
But I do think that they share more than they do. They're still more in common with each other than they are with most other game types. It's like you're like, oh, it's like you see two brothers who are like constantly fighting, and you're like, you're basically the same person. And you're like, no, I'm not. He's 2 inches taller, and I'm stronger. And like, well, and blah blah blah. You're like, you guys are still the same. Like,
So it sounds like what we're arguing. The point of all this is just like, how much do these like different game features, these mechanics, components, the dynamics, how much do they really matter for overall gameplay and for our impression? And certain things seem to matter more than others. I think we're talking about tile sets, for instance. Like, if we just change the tile set on something, does that really matter? Or like for Cogmind, for instance, like if we just change the narrative from the D&D focus to like this kind of futuristic focus, but everything else is the same, does that still like qualify? And so we can kind of say, well, yeah, the narrative, that doesn't actually really matter so much. And we can say that tile set probably doesn't matter so much. But when we look at things like, but we can look at like permadeath and like the run-based permadeath, we could say, that's actually kind of like, that matters a lot. Tile-based, well, that's more like up in the air, but like turn-based isn't, and like simulated environment, is it a dungeon crawler? Like we talked about like a number of these different features, and so we could probably rank order them. But like, coming back to my definition, the more of these features and the more of the more important ones that are like Rogue, the more it really is qualified. But is there a distinct cutoff point? I think that's a ridiculous argument to make. Unless if something has all the properties and of Rogue, and we all agreed, which we can't, of the importance of all these things, then I'd say, yeah, then we could say that is like definitively the thing. But like, for every person, there's a definition, a different feeling about importance. And so,
sure, but the fun of this is poking at like, where do you think the line? It's like, where's like, how far away from this before it stops being useful as a categorization tool?
I'm gonna say I got 8 bullet points on features. I say you got to have like 6 out of 8 of these bullet points to like, if I had to draw a line in the sand, to like be roguelike. Otherwise, you're roguelite. But just have a couple.
So, well, then what's the difference between a roguelite and a game that's not a roguelite? Like, that's, I feel like, honestly, for me, that is the more interesting discussion, is not whether like the gradations within the larger category, but what is the category itself? Like, is XCOM a roguelite? Is Terraria a roguelite?
It's a very, very simple answer to that too. It's just like, does it have 2 of those elements? I'm going to say 2 to choose a number here. If it has at least 2 of those elements,
I feel
and
like
other things, then it can be a roguelite.
I don't know what your things are yet, but I can guarantee you that 2 is not enough if they're the wrong 2.
All right, I want to interject here just for a hot second, because I think we've cracked open the Pandora's box of the light, which I hate that word. I hate roguelite.
No, I love it now.
It implies less goodness, right? Like light beer, or like, oh, it just has a light dusting of rogue.
It's also just difficult to say.
Yeah, like it's phonetically identical to rogue. Like, if someone's just like driving past in a car and says, "Hey, we should go play a roguelike," you're like,
where was he from again?
Well, he's traveling from Albuquerque west at 60 miles an hour, and he says like
he's traveling from Moria to Angband. On
propose,
Shadowfax, the wings, with the speed of the Maiar.
Mm-hmm. All right, so
Outstanding.
continuing briefly, I'll abbreviate it here with our history lesson. 2008, we have the Rise of Berlin interpretation, but incidentally, we also have the same time when Derek Yu created his original version of Spelunky, which was like, hey, what if I took elements from that list and I applied them to platformers? Huge explosion of popularity with that game. Kicks open the door for Binding of Isaac in 2011. And then in 2013, Rogue Legacy, another platformer, comes out, which specifically says in all of its marketing material that it is a rogue-lite. I think this is where we see the first incarnation of it, is rogue-lite, Rogue Legacy. And the way that they defined rogue-lite for their game at the time was meta progression. So Spelunky has no meta progression. It is just get good, scrub. I mean, I guess if you count shortcuts, but you know, it's whatever. Binding of Isaac, not really the same kind of meta progression, because like Enter the Gungeon, it's like, oh, you unlock stuff that goes into the dungeon that you encounter. It doesn't make your character more powerful when you start. Rogue Legacy is the thing that tilts it on its head, where it's like, oh, you have these passive upgrades like we see in Hades now, of things that, oh, like the start of my run now is easier. That, I think, is what knocked down another wall, was to say, oh, the developers of Rogue Legacy say, well, we're a roguelite in that sense of, like, the game will get progressively easier instead of just being like a constant punch in the face and it's your fault if you get burnt out and can't beat the game. Now, the other flip side of that is, so there's like meta progression, roguelike versus light. It's going to be a very tongue twister episode. And then our old school community, which thinks roguelike versus light is based on turn-based or not. Turn-based versus real-time.
And really? That's the determining factor? Come on.
I mean, there was a post, our good friends, the Temple of the Roguelike, who are traditional roguelike community, put up a poll to say, you know, what is your personal, very own, non-transferable roguelite versus roguelike boundary? And it was split, like almost down the middle, between meta progression or not turn-based, and there was some stragglers for other reasons. But I was shocked that it wasn't overwhelmingly in one direction.
That's ridiculous. But that would put Slay the Spire, regardless of which one is in there, as a roguelike, which I don't think it is at all.
No,
but it's a roguelike deck builder, right? Is there a difference between a roguelike deck builder and a roguelite deck builder?
I would guess that they would say that Slay the Spire also fails on many other criteria, so he's still not a roguelike. It's like turn-based alone is not enough to qualify as roguelike. You also have to have tiles and movement.
I didn't hear that.
Actions.
I heard that the splitting criteria between like and light was, is it turn-based?
But well, I bet you they would say that Slay the Spire isn't even a roguelite. Like that's like, say, yeah, it's so far out of the category that they're not even considering it to start with.
Yeah, you just got a bunch of dumb people out there voicing their opinions. See, everyone just needs to listen to Will here.
There's four of them right here.
The voice of truth.
I mean, that's why I like the idea of the term traditional roguelike, because I feel like that is the most restrictive. It's tile-based, turn-based, little to no meta progression, and permadeath. Like those and randomness. Like that feels like that is you can constrain a pretty good like subset of games with that.
Well, you missed a few critical things there, but yeah, I agree. I like the idea of just the brand, the traditional roguelike. It makes it very clear. There's no ambiguity around that. This is a very much the highest level of restriction. And then we can discard all those games because there's no such thing as a good roguelike game anyways.
Whoa, look out.
Traditional roguelike.
The Berlin interpretation forgot one critical element, which is
I prefer the Nidorf variation.
It has to be, the game has to be unfun. Actually, I was playing the original Rogue and it was surprisingly engaging, I gotta say. I think I was having some amount of fun. to some extent. What is this hang up with? Why is there hang up on like grid based? Like, why does it have to be grid based? I feel like no other genre definition is constrained by that. Like, you have platformers, that are two-dimensional side scrollers, and then you have platformers that are, are 3D. You have, different FPSs, which are, well, that's probably not a great example, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Technically, you do have 2D, 2.5D, and like 3D FPSs. Like, is the tile part like that important?
It makes it so that if you have the turn-based element, which you might argue is more important, the tile makes it so that if you wanted to calculate distances, like while you're paused to figure out, well, the fireball will hit this thing and hit the wall and it'll blow that up. It just makes it so you can calculate things a little easier. That's my guess.
Andrew, have you played Warhammer stuff?
Indeed. Wait, which one?
I don't know. I mean, I have not. So this is more me questioning, like, is Warhammer one of the war games where you like measure things instead of having tiles?
Yeah.
So I think that you could theoretically have it's not the tiles, it's the like limited time action thing, and tiles just is so much easier to implement that rather than like,
well, in that way, I mean, if it's just a measurement of distance, then like all games have like X, Y, and Z coordinates. It's like every game, arguably.
Yeah, I would say
you extend that definition out. I realize no one's like dying on the hill at that, but it keeps coming up, and I thought that was
my guess is that it's like the difference between a tile based and something like Enter the Gungeon, like where it's really the freedom of movement
versus being constrained to a locked grid. Well, this comes this ties into my crackpot theory that really, so long as you have a game that has enough meaningful gameplay impacting randomization, it kind of organically just becomes a roguelike. Because when you set off with like the task of like, I want a game that is meaningfully random, what's the easiest way to do that? What's the most, like, as we've just discussed, put it on a grid. That's that, and that just kind of grows out of that. And same thing with permadeath. It's like, why would you put permadeath in the game? Well, because you want to showcase this amazing randomness that you have going on. And why is the game hard? Of course, classically, roguelikes are very difficult. Well, it's got to be difficult to kind of, press you into that permadeath to show off the randomization and to give you all of those exciting different experiences. And I would argue that games that don't have emergent gameplay or permadeath or are hard or tile based are just roguelikes that aren't very good ones.
I'm gonna throw out
unfortunately, real quick, by my definition, Tetris is a roguelike.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
that's one of the best games of all time.
I'm gonna throw out a game here that satisfies many characteristics of roguelike.
GoldenEye 64.
It is run-based. It has permadeath. It has ultimate amount of randomness. It's very difficult.
Life. No.
Solitaire.
Ooh,
I think Solitaire is basically a roguelike.
And you kind of do play it on a grid. You
kind of play it on a grid. I mean, it lacks the like movement and like progression around a world, which I think is what actually keeps it from being even a roguelite game in many ways. Like, you're not moving around, there is no world at all to be random, but there is a lot of meaningful randomness in it.
Yeah, this is why I said there has to be at least two properties, just to avoid exactly this scenario where you choose one, which is just like, oh yeah, just some degree of randomness, and doesn't maybe quite cut it.
Because gameplay and this has like in terms to be clear.
So Will, this has like 4 categories that I think that there have to be categories that are also like, if it doesn't have this, then it's not a roguelike. I don't know. So what is it, like the necessary but not, or sufficient but not necessary, or necessary but not sufficient game? Like, find a counterexample type thing.
I suppose. I mean, I'm not so hung up on this, but I will say overall, Andrew's impression of like randomness, like being a core part and of like this sort of like, I think the paradigm being linear gameplay where your missions to save the world and you have to do this thing. You got to defeat the elites 4. You've got to do these things, beat all the 8 dungeons. Yeah, like that's one style of game, and then we have this kind of divergent. This whole genre, you could say, maybe fits under this category of like, oh yeah, well, it's just like there is maybe still a mission, but like the way you get there is not the same every time. And I think that's like probably the core of it. And I think the reason that like that is fun to us is that we as human beings really like what's known as variable probability rewards, and not knowing what's going to happen. The surprise is very important for that dopamine hit that we get. Whereas if you're just doing the regular linear gameplay, oh, I'm going to rush to this person, I'm going to get this thing right away. And it's not as much, it's not as engaging in that same way for our monkey brains to interpret like, ooh, I found the berry bush and now I'm eating the berries. Oh, how exciting was that? I didn't expect to see the berries over here.
Yeah. Emergent gameplay, emergent story, emergent.
Indeed. My definition is pretty flawed, but very flawed. But I was kind of giving myself the personal mission of like, oh, if I had to boil it down to like one thing. So it's, very, very imperfect, kind of by my own prompt and design given to myself. However, going back to the concept of like, if we were to rank, like what's the most important element of a roguelike? It sounds like we're kind of in agreement that randomization and that shuffling of the deck is very important.
I'd put that up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's really it's some sort of meaningful loss on when you lose. You don't just save scum. Like I feel like if you have the ability or desire to save scum when you lose, then that like kind of pushes it out of being truly roguelite-y. And then also randomness. Which I think in general makes it just like you can't have too long of a run and have it be roguelike or roguelite. Like something like Civ 4 or Europa Universalis or any of those 4X games have a lot of the characteristics of roguelites, but like, oh, I'm 25 hours into this campaign. I lost a bad battle and like my game's over. It's like, fuck that. I'm save scumming this. I'm going to go back and I'm going to play it differently because I'm not going to put in another 25 hours to get here. I might play this game only one time through and experience the randomness only once.
Kind of like accidentally asymptotes into an RPG at that point, right?
Yeah, with random elements.
Yeah, you have to be pretty hardcore to like play a game like a Civ or like a Rimworld and be like, well, I guess we're dead now. I just spent 30 hours building this perfect colony, and then oh no, I forgot about the underground infestations, and now I'm doomed.
That's one of the kind of major pillars of maybe one of the most early divisive of the traditional roguelike community games, Dwarf Fortress, in that the idea is that it says it like all over the place. Losing is fun. And I think that's supposed to be like a core tenet of this genre that, oh, I lost, but I really want to start another run because now I know that thing is there and I'm going to put that file away, that back in my memory, and I'm going to watch out for it next time. So that way the Vulcan Raven can't get me, or if I can avoid this security sweep robot or something like that. But Dwarf Fortress, I think it like does that deliberately, where it's like, I'm going to throw giant demons at you that are going to knock down your castle walls. Your fortress is going to get overrun by goblins emerging from the deep caves. And that's it. And your run is over. But an interesting thing about Dwarf Fortress is that historical record of like everything that's happened in your fortress is saved in like the legends mode or the histories that have happened in your world. So it's not really gone per se. And like you spin up a new fortress and people will say like, hey, remember that fortress down the road that got overrun by demonic goats? Wasn't that crazy? Like there's still that kind of element of not quite meta progression, but there's a less of a save scummy oriented nature too. I mean, I save scum Dwarf Fortress all the time, so I'm going to talk, but like the ability to let it go and just say, oh, it's fine that thing lived and died, and it's fine to start a new thing. This, again, we're just coming back to analogies for life here, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like these games, like a Dwarf Fortress, Rimworld, I think those are perfect examples, or Civ, or like these really long games that have a lot of these characteristics that are roguelike. Like I think they probably start out more in this what I'll say is roguelite, which is to say, like, you die, and like you die because, like in Rimworld, like, you didn't understand the freezer, or like something attacked you that you didn't expect. Then you learn, and then you're okay. You actually want to restart because you're like, oh, I've got a better base design in mind, and like I realize I've learned my lesson. But once you learn enough lessons, and then you just get some bad luck essentially, or feels like just bad luck, that's when you feel like, okay, I'm gonna just reload. And so it starts to transition from I'm glad to die to like, I put too much into this, and I learned that lesson a long time. I forgot. I don't need to learn that lesson again. I know the game wants me to restart here, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, you kind of skill out of it being a roguelike.
That's an interesting idea of the game transitions with your skill from being a roguelite to out of that.
This is something I see all the time with Caves of Cud, a for sure stay tuned traditional roguelike grid bumper, as people were jokingly referring to. Where I think Caves of Cud is a bad roguelike game. I think if you were to play that game and you spend 25 minutes setting up your character creation, and then like it's very God, we just did that episode on it. Cataclysm.
Yeah, I say
you walk around the corner,
the same trap.
Yeah, like you walk around the corner, bam, you're dead, haha, and you're just like, well, how was I supposed to know to expect that, right? At least with Caves of Cud, it gives you it builds in like standard RPG elements to it of like, yeah, that was kind of bullshit, huh? You'd probably want to reload that save, don't you? And you're like, yes, master. And then, you are able to kind of walk back a little bit from it. But yeah, I think compared to something like Dreadmore, where, Will, you got super into Dreadmore, way more than Colin and I did.
I just had no other fun games that I was playing. I wouldn't say I got into it, but...
I mean, you put a lot of hours into it.
Yeah, I put a lot of hours, and I have a great time, though.
There was some level of engagement there where, like, I'm sure you walk around the corner, you get bludgeoned over the head by a diggle or something, and you're like, okay, but like, I'm gonna restart and avoid that kind of trap again. Versus like, I was 10 hours into that run, I'll just hit the reload button.
Yeah, I feel like Cataclysm is you skill out of being a roguelike in some ways too. Like, I was watching a Let's Play this past week after we did the episode and rated it so poorly, but I was watching videos of it nonetheless. And it's like, I've watched like 10 hours of this guy playing a single character. It's like, this is becoming, it's a base builder now. It's a survival crafting game, not a roguelike game. Mm-hmm. And like other games that we played, what's that game? The Last Spell. Mm-hmm. Like, that is definitely a skill out of becoming a roguelite or roguelike. Like, if you are good at it, or even moderately good at it, you probably won't lose. And if you do lose, it'll be very frustrating because you'll spend so many hours getting to that point.
Mm-hmm. I just had to be.
So are roguelite games less hardcore than roguelike games?
What do you mean by hardcore?
Are roguelite games light as in light beer, or light as in, oh, I've finally seen the light, Light?
No. It's very simple. You just take it's light in its similarity to Rogue. So it has the bold, it has the flavor of Rogue, but it also has the new fruit mango included in its flavor profile, and like it has some of the base properties, or like it's a liquid, but it's a completely kind of different kind of liquid. Like that's why there's a huge variety in what that enables, because you're just building in new mechanics to some of the properties of Rogue.
You lose some of the hardcore in some aspects, but you gain them in others because you are able to build more complexity on top of a character because you're not expected to lose that character in like an hour. You can build a more complicated ecosystem in a lot of cases.
Like Hades is a roguelite game. You're expected to lose within the hour. You're expected to lose within like a 20 or 25-minute window.
But I would say that Hades is significantly closer to the roguelike than many of the other games that we.
It's not a racing game, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the real question is, how much does meta progression matter in how we're looking at these games?
Ooh.
I don't think that meta progression is as
divisive,
is as important as a lot of other people seem to think it is. I think of meta progression as automated scaling down of the difficulty.
Yes.
You're basically just like, I'm getting tired of playing at the hard mode, and so I'm going to slowly slide her down towards the easy or medium mode. And then when I get better, I'll slide it back up. It just is the game doing that automatically for you. Because once you get good at Hades, then you start adding all of the stuff back in, the heat levels and whatever, and you make it harder and harder and more hardcore. So you're basically just like, it's just like, oh, it's a computer. It's the programmer doing that work of like figuring out how hard the game should be for me. It's just doing that automatically.
It's brilliant. It's a great system. Like I hate the selected level of difficulty at the beginning. I think that's the terrible way of doing it. And like meta progression is a really, I think, beautiful way of helping scale the difficulty so that on the axis of like your skill and the difficulty of the game, the most engagement you find is right in the middle as you extend out. And so this just automatically helps pull you into that center and keep the game in that fun, engaging zone. So I love that meta progression as an idea.
Pretty elegant design, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think I agree for the most part, and I think there's like different levels to which I want that at different times, or like I'm in a mood for it versus others. Like if I'm like, yeah, I want to make some more progress in Dead Cells, I want to unlock this cool weapon. Yeah, I'll grind a couple levels to get some meta currency and unlock it. Great, now I can use this thing in the future. Versus something like Spelunky or like Enter the Gungeon to some extent, of like, okay, I'm gonna start this game knowing full well that like it's just me in the game. I don't have to really worry about grinding for anything. I don't have to worry about like going in with a specific mission objective to accomplish other than, hey, let's try to beat the game. And that can feel liberating in a sense of like, oh, it's like one less thing I have to think about. Like I have to think about all the other bullshit nonsense in Spelunky, but like I don't have to worry about like, oh man, do I have to, how far away am I from unlocking the jetpack? Okay, I gotta go do this other thing first before I can have the real fun.
The only thing that matters is that run.
Yes.
There's nothing outside of it. Yeah.
Yeah, more boring. I agree. It's not as good. That was your point, right?
Yeah. Colin, I'm looking through your spreadsheet that you so dutifully put together late last night. Why is StarCraft on this list?
Oh, this is not a list of games that are roguelike. This is me just like, it was, I like, okay, so I have this list that I put together of things that are kind of in roguelike games. And then I looked at each individual column and was like, are there any other games that are like this? Like I considered putting in games that are even less. I considered putting Call of Duty on there just to be like, I wanted to find a game that satisfied none of the characteristics. Rocket League satisfies almost none of these characteristics. But then actually, now that I look at it, it kind of does. Like, oh, well, there you go.
Player versus world to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. But like, runs end in death. Like, does losing a game in Rocket League count as run ending in death? I think it kind of does. Like, you don't get to save scum it and try again. Mm-hmm. I think that the fact that it's not against other people, or that it's against other people, is like a fundamental difference. But yeah, I think there are a lot of interesting games that you'll notice maybe that I added the original Mario in here, because I feel like that has like a surprising number of things in common And the one thing that it doesn't have is randomness, and that like is a death blow. Like it's not at all like a roguelike. But it runs, you die at the end, and you have permadeath, and you go back to the start, and you have no
You have
manipulation.
lives. You have a few lives. Permadeath is not like.
Yeah, okay.
Well, you
But,
run
like-
out of those lives, you're in permadeath mode.
I guess
Sure.
in Binding of Isaac, you have like there's something that like the 9 lives ability, and so does that technically pull it out of the category then, or does that invalidate its permadeath characteristic?
Ooh.
But like I think like the original Mario has some things that are more in common with roguelite games than you might initially think. You're like, yeah, it does have runs in it. You do die, and
Hey, you do hit the run button. Yeah, I agree.
like you do, but there's no randomness.
Mhm.
So that's like
Boom. There you go.
It-
Randomness
it's-
reigns supreme.
Don't tell
fundamentally
speedrunners
not-
that. Speedrunners
not a
will
rogue.
disagree because they try and get that perfect pixel, and it's only 1/3 of the time that will allow them to jump through the
Oh,
thing.
that's-
And
Yeah,
That's
I
interesting.
mean, I think
point.
that
Well,
we
even
have
those
to-
can be predicted to some extent in certain
Yeah.
games, like what subpixels and which
Yeah.
frame you are on. Like,
Yeah, I think we have to just count out speed running as a.
is there a Mario roguelike project
has
that
to be.
anyone's made?
I would be shocked if there was not some kind of ROM hack that just randomized the level layout
Super
every time.
Rogue Brothers.
Ooh, interesting.
All right,
idea.
so pivoting, Colin, kind of off of your list,
Pivot.
Yeah.
I have a list of game genre boundaries of, well, so I wrote this out before you put together your spreadsheet, because I'm like, this will be a great conversation topic. How roguey is it? And Colin, I know you have your scientifically inarguable percentage number there, but just getting a temperature read of the room. Minecraft. How roguey is it?
mildly.
Adventure mode isn't that a thing?
Mildly, slightly more if you're playing on actual hardcore mode,
Sure.
where it deletes your world after you die.
Yeah. How about Diablo games? Any of
Pretty
them.
high up there, I think. I
Slightly
reckon.
more mild, yeah, like moderate.
Wait, really?
Procedurally generated worlds. You've got loot that's randomly generated. You got a big focus on random generation of enemies, of emergent gameplay through like a combination of enemies and environments. It's got those things.
Doesn't
But
have
you-
permadeath at
There's
all.
a
Well,
single character that
What-
there's
I
no
think-
runs in it. I guess.
Are you kidding me? Do you know how many runs I did to fight
Greater Rifts.
Yeah, the greater rifts. I mean, those are all runs.
I remember the day in, I think it was 6th grade in health class when a mutual friend of all of ours came in absolutely crestfallen that his paladin, his hardcore mode paladin,
this was Robert, wasn't it?
had gotten
Is it really?
burglarized
Really?
by I forget some kind of horrible beast, but it was a randomly generated boss monster that had gotten him. I think what more than permadeath, I think personally what holds Diablo back from being like a true roguelike is that the way the gameplay is, the randomization, like it impacts the gameplay, but it's like not hugely significant. Like it's like navigating the maps is like you're almost on like autopilot, like looking at the mini map and just kind of click going through. And so it's like the randomization, I mean, it's impactful, but it's not as impactful as a true roguelike. Moderately, what on a scale of 1 to 10, 5 average roguiness.
It's a 4.
I'm gonna pull some words from noted friend of the podcast, Joe, of Monster Train fame. His word was a loss-based game loop, and I think that's a good metric of like that. Like if you lose in Diablo, does it matter? If the answer is no, then that's the kind of run type thing that I'm looking
Does matter.
at.
Like it matters to some degree, and in some cases in the game it matters a lot more than others. Like you might have to do another 20-minute fight again if you lost halfway through, and you'll lose a certain level of experience or go. I don't remember what you lose exactly, but
does the existence of a game having a toggleable permadeath hardcore mode warrant inclusion in the conversation?
just scales it up how
Totally.
closely it. I mean, that's the difference between a
Yeah.
3 and a 4, or a 4 and a 5.
Yeah.
All right, next on the list, we kind of brushed on this a little bit before. XCOM. How roguey is it?
Oh, it's like a solid 7, easy.
7.
If not 8, Iron Man
No.
mode. Here we come. And also like the early ones. Ooh, and it's grid based. Whew. There's no dungeon crawl, I guess.
Well, unless you count
A
like
little
the
bit more than
base building
Diablo.
part, maybe. No, yeah.
I'll go 6 with that one. I think
Yeah.
6 seems reasonable.
All right. Next
Because there's a
one
lot more focus on the meta progression in that one, and there's a lot
true.
of other decisions.
Next one on the list that will get Colin's beard all agitated. Into the Breach. Is it a rogue? How roguey is it?
I haven't played it.
Let's see here.
Not?
Tile-based, permadeath, dungeon crawler. Doesn't have a simulated environment, procedurally generated maps. The turn-based is the game doesn't have it so that things move when you move. It's you move and then they move. But there's not a single character, there's multiple characters. I'm gonna say it's probably like an 8.
Yeah, I feel like for some reason it ticks a lot of the boxes, but it doesn't feel like a roguelike to me. And I'm not sure why.
My take on it is that I think Colin's right to be skeptical, but I think I agree with Will more in that it's a rogue type game applied to a different genre, and it's applied to the puzzle genre, right?
Yeah, okay.
Where you have so like rogue games can be like those mechanics can be applied to FPS games. It doesn't make them like as pure of a traditional roguelike. Of course it wouldn't, but it has enough of that flavor to it that would be close enough, I would guess. Which transitions very nicely into the next bullet point I have here. And speaking of beards, Deep Rock Galactic, how roguey is it?
Ooh, great question. Oh, a little bit. I think the game is like so.
I don't
It's
know.
unbased.
I didn't play it because you guys. I was like busy for the 1 week you guys played it, and by the time I was like, I'm ready to play Deep Rock Galactic, you were like, oh no, we've burned our way through. We're done with it now.
Rock and
Okay,
stone
fine.
To the
Over
bone.
it.
I
mean,
say those words and I don't even know what they mean, really. Rod.
6.
One of the draws for like permadeath for me is that like it really sort of amplifies the enjoyment and the experience of a game. Like there's a lot of games I've played where it's like if there wasn't permadeath, I wouldn't be experiencing as much fun and excitement. Because like it's so there's so much on the line, It's like it's very intense. And with like Deep Rock Galactic, it's like you always have the option to start again, run it again. Like who cares? Like even if you were to like slap on a permadeath option to it, like it wouldn't matter. But I don't know. My whole definition is hinging on like randomness is number one most important thing, and the game does have a very good randomization, 3D randomization system. So I don't know. I guess it's 2, 3, something like that.
I mean, I'm saying 6 because I mean, like in each run, like it does have like the procedurally generated world with like where it is like a hack and slash sort of thing with like items that are randomly generated. Things though, like the first person, I think being a FPS really loses a lot of points for it being roguelike. I mean, even if the world is simulated and all that, like it doesn't quite make up for it. In fact, I'm gonna say 5 actually, considering all these other factors. Not tile based. It's not it's not turn based. So yeah, 5, maybe even 4 or 5. Yeah, okay.
Interesting.
All right, I want to throw one out. Not a real game, but PUBG. If there was a randomly generated world.
Loot collection. Well, it's interesting because it's player versus player.
Yeah.
Are there PvP roguelikes?
I don't know, but like that's the
Does
question.
That just count it? Maybe interesting.
Like, can you have a roguelike? I guess maybe even more than that. Like, what if it was a traditional roguelike in all the ways except for you all start on the map at the same time and it's PvP? Is that still a roguelike? like, does the fact that like being like a weird battle royale elimination match, does that mean just like, how many negative points is that?
I'm gonna get something wrong, but I'll say it anyway because I'm very confident in myself. I believe Tales of Maj'Eyal, like an earlier iteration of it, Tome, had like an online multiplayer aspect. I don't think it was PvP, but I seem to recall there was like some kind of online multiplayer engagement element to it that did not disqualify it from the conversation. So I think like even if you did have a PvP aspect in there, like if it was like literally like, and I've kind of noodled about this myself, like what would Cogmind look like as like a PvP game on like a multiplayer server on like, I don't know, something like a 2D Halo map or something crazy. Like, could that even work? And just like going off into like a mind spiral of game ideas. But I think that could work. Like I think PUBG has elements of like bullshit item resource management, permadeath. You know, if it was on a random map,
Yeah,
that seems like it could be good
have to be
enough.
on a random map. I
Yeah.
think the static map is enough to like say no, because then you can just like memorize where things are a little bit.
Sure. For me, I feel like the randomization, just having a factor, a random factor is not enough in my definition to be roguelike. It needs to be gameplay impactful to the actual gameplay. And like the crux of the PUBG gameplay, the most important part of the PUBG gameplay is the combat and is like the behavior of your other players. And like just randomizing the map, like I don't know, it's I not especially. I think it would just be an FPS, a PvP FPS game with a random mode, like a
your goal.
one.
Your goal would be to ignore the randomness as much as possible, so that you can focus on the people.
That is interesting, and they did add one bit of randomness in PUBG, which was weather. And people hated it, and they got patched out.
And then whatever Fortnite is, which I don't even know enough about Fortnite to know if there is randomness in there.
That's the
They've
thing.
got more than one map, right? They've got building.
I guess it. Yeah,
you can do dances, and you can be Darth Vader or something.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting question. Sure, it could be like a really crappy roguelike. A really bad one.
We've been using roguelike all the time, but we all mean roguelite here now that we've talked about all these things.
We do.
I feel like we're not even being...
Take,
as we all... Yes.
My hot take is that they're the same thing.
Ooh, that's spicy.
Because I don't think there's a meaningful enough difference. Number one, I don't think there's a data-driven way to determine what is a roguelike versus a roguelite. I don't think there's any data that... So, like, you go to a store page on Steam, what data could you show me that determines this game is one or the other?
Very easily.
At that, then.
So there are these properties over here, these 8 properties, these perfectly listed 8 properties. And then you check off how many of these properties are on there. And if it has 6 of them, then it falls into the...
How would you script that, right? Like, would you just be combing through the game's description or bio or something?
We just add these 8 more like sort of categorical like things, and then the game creators would check the boxes about whether or not the game has that. It's just so simple. I don't see why you don't see it. It's just...
Don't Steam tags do that?
Well, I don't know how Steam tags work. I thought that the creators make it, but it doesn't matter. As long as these boxes get checked, and then we apply this metric of 6 out of 8. And then if it's 5,
listening,
5 to 8 or 5 to 6 or 4 to 6 properties, we'll call it light just to give it a number. And then the 6 to 8, we'll call it a like.
So, Will, I've baited you a little bit with the Steam tag question because so on Steam you have, I think there's like 5 or 6 different rogue type tags for games. There's like action roguelikes, one that's just straight up roguelike. There's one that's roguelite. There's roguelike deck builder, Slay the Spire. You have Roguevania, and then there's maybe like one other one. And so of 5,072 games that are tagged as roguelike, 3,070 are also tagged roguelite. which is
Uh-oh.
They're not following my
60%
overlap.
overlap.
They're not following my system.
Steam
God,
has not
it's just so
responded to the
simple.
many letters, the many
The many
So okay,
registered
here's
mail.
the way that it works. All games that were
Certified.
called roguelites are now called roguelikes, and all games that were called roguelikes are now just called traditional roguelikes.
Yeah, that was the one that I was missing. Was there's a specific tag for traditional roguelikes, and you click on that one, and that's like the exact universe that I think for games that, for the most part, are not super up our alley, but like they do exist. They do warrant conversation to some degree. That is the cogmind end of the spectrum. But I think like the Steam ecosystem is super bad at this for one major reason, and that's because Steam is an all or nothing catch basin, where if your game has like one tag applied for roguelike, then you go into the category, you search for roguelikes, that thing has a chance of showing up in there. Even if it's 1 out of 10,000 tags applied, it's an all or nothing search with no nuance, which is kind of a hindrance. To pivot off that, with more fun stats. So for games that have at least 1,000 reviews, the bottom 5 games that have by how many rogue type tags they have associated with them are, let's see, Two-Ho Big Battle. No one's gonna have heard of any of these. Rogue Company, and so this first one is 0.25% of its total tag volume are rogue based. Rogue Company is 0.36%.
Wait, how many tags do these games have?
They have a lot. They have a ton of
Who decides the
tags? You go into Steam, you click on tags, and you like click on one to apply that tag,
So
or you
anyone
can
apply a
type in
tag?
one.
So anyone can apply a tag to a game?
Anyone can apply a
Yeah,
tag.
that's the problem. See, democracy is a terrible idea.
Democracy was a mistake. We all
We
know
should
it.
have the creators of the game check the boxes for the features that it has.
Here, I'm gonna
Because
look
they'd know.
up,
They would know.
So
All hail Lord Gaben comes and personally evaluates your game.
Yeah, just get. They need to hire Will. Will is the ultimate classifier. You apply him to any situation, you're going to get very distinct edges around the classifications. It's going to be very.
all right, so
He's not wrong.
so for example, Hades.
Judgments will be
It's
made.
going to be a good deal. Yeah.
Hades has 24% of its total tag volume are rogue, or of some rogue type of that list that I talked about. That seems about right. Risk of Rain 2 is 21%. Binding of Isaac is 24%. Deep Rock Galactic has 4% of its total tag volume as rogue based.
It's a terrible metric. Total tag volume being rogue. I don't know.
So going back to the list of the bottom 5 least roguey ones. Maybe some of you have played Luftrausers, Andrew? No? 0.48%. Don't Starve Together is in the bottom 5 with 0.67% of its total tag volume as being rogue based.
So people are just giving it way too many tags then.
No,
Yeah,
so what's interesting about that is it was up to 10% earlier this year when I pulled a snapshot, and then the devs nuked all of those tags down to 0.67%. So it was like 10%, and then they were just like, no, our game isn't actually roguey.
They're also wrong. But is Stacklands in there? Because according to my calculations, Stacklands is not only the least roguelike game we've played, but is less roguelike than the majority of other kinds of games that we've played.
Stacklands has 6.61% of its total tag volume is rogue based, which is more than Deep Rock.
I feel like that
That's
just
a lot.
indicates, therefore, this is the evidence against Steam tags.
But it's interesting because like, do more Steam tags make a game more roguey? Maybe not. But Rogue Legacy is the number 2 for the top 5 most, with a whopping 39% of its total tag volume being
We'll just have to go
rogue
put
based.
weird tags on it, and then it'll lower it down.
There you go. Vote with your feet, people.
You just have to have the expert reviewers, like a Gene Picks, sort of like just go in there and just like do all, like one person does their own evaluation of these games to
Gene's
give the true
trash.
tags. oh, I'm gonna go with Gene picks because I know Gene always picks the right games and the right.
Well, that's what
text.
Steam curators are supposed to be for.
We know the true arbiter of taste. It's ChatGPT.
There we go. See,
just go. All right, we have to open up ChatGPT and just ask, "Is this game roguelike?" And then each one in there, and if it says yes, then we're good.
Answer only yes or no. Yeah, actually, I wonder.
I'm going there right now. What game should I ask?
Just go through that list. Go through your list and just add a new column, which is
tell
like
me
ChatGPT.
just one name. Just
Inscription.
Inscription's too new, probably, right? When did it come out?
Do Binding of Isaac.
Do Kenshi. Or Majora's Mask. Is that a rogue? Is that a rogue Zelda game?
Well, there are randomizers for speedrunning for those, but again, I don't know if the randomization like randomizes the gameplay that much.
All right. Is Kenshi a roguelike game? Rate it 1 to 10. GPT-4 is stalling.
Oh my gosh, it's such a lofty issue that even all this computer calculation
it says
power
that it is
can
not
do it.
Traditionally classified as a roguelike.
Oh my gosh.
Free roaming squad-based RPG with open-ended sandbox world. Rating Kenshi on a 1 to 10 is subjective. God damn it. This is why I hate ChatGPT now.
You know, Bard would have said it was a roguelike. Just saying.
It says maybe 8 or 9 out of 10. That's too high.
It's hallucinating.
8 or 9.
Colin,
no. This is like rating it as a game, like for how good it is, which is okay. There we go. Good job, ChatGPT.
Colin, you were asking about board games related to this discussion.
Yeah,
and you had a couple on your spreadsheet. I was I was noodling around with Gloomhaven, the digital version that you can find on Steam, and I was like, yeah, do you mean I could squint my eyes and convince myself that this game is rogue adjacent in a way.
Yeah, that seems like about the best you could give it. Rogue adjacent,
right? But that transitive property doesn't retroactively apply to the tabletop game as a result, does it? It has to be a video game, right?
No, I do not think that. I do not think that it has to be a video game to be roguelike. I think that it just makes it much easier. I think that you could do everything. Like you could play Slay the Spire with a deck of cards.
Didn't they kickstart a tabletop version?
No, but I'm not saying like a tabletop version. I'm saying that you could play the actual game Slay the Spire with a board game box with someone running the monsters via like dice and like a description of how they're supposed to be run. It would take a really long time. It would probably not be that fun of a board game. It's a better video game. But I think most roguelike games, especially the turn-based ones, you could make a bad board game and have them be substantially the same game. It just would be bad because it would take too long to run it.
All I gotta say is that you better thank your lucky stars that you didn't ask this question in Berlin. You would have been run out of town on a rail. Let me tell you. Whew. This is very controversial. Yeah, you could totally simulate that. Are there any like existing ones? That's a great question. I don't know a ton about Gloomhaven, but it's sort of a dungeon crawler descent kind of.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough randomness in it to truly call it a roguelike game. I don't think there's enough randomness in the world, and there's pretty defined scenarios and for like all of the different little levels. Like they're not procedurally generated, which you can absolutely do in a board game. You could have like random tiles and place them, but there's like a booklet and it's like, here's how you place the tiles in the way to make this scenario. Here's exactly how many monsters are supposed to be for various difficulty levels and stuff like that. So great game though. Very good game.
So while you're chatting there, I just to verify that ChatGPT is in fact it's the smartest thing out there. I gave it the 1 to 10 sort of in roguelike, and I just to establish the bounds, Cogmine is like 10. Mario 64 1. Slay the Spire is an 8 or a 9. XCOM is a 4 or 5. FTL is an 8.
Yeah, that sound about right.
Yeah, so like
It's just distilling the wisdom of the internet.
right. It's I think that yeah, just screw tagging and screw having, obviously the will picks and the will tags would be phenomenal, but ChatGPT tags would probably be pretty good.
Yeah, all right. All future episodes have to include like, what does ChatGPT think about how roguelike this game is?
Or just have it give us the rating out of 10, just like for the funness of the game, like we've been doing.
Just have it write the whole episode and then we'll put it into 7 labs or whatever.
11 labs. Yeah, I mean, my voice is already synthesized. You could just have it just, argue with you all and interrupt you all. It'll be great.
We laugh, but Spotify is doing that. They're ingesting like affiliated podcast RSS feed data into like auto-generated voice samples, which makes me kind of almost want to pull the podcast RSS feed off Spotify, but I don't know.
I've already cloned you, so it's too late.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, it's too late.
I mean, I've got all this audio. I mean, why wouldn't I?
I've already captured your soul.
Gotta catch him up.
Andrew, I feel like you would be well posed for one of these philosophy corner questions that I have.
Oh, is that
where the inception of like a genre, and then it's like many splinter factions that are all, again, like more similar to each other than they are different, but all trying to vie for their own corner of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we brushed on this very slightly at the beginning. Metal music genres.
Yes, I'm very glad that you brought this up. Yes, classically, us metalheads are very pedantic about which subgenres are what and which bands fit into what subgenre. Because of course you got heavy metal, you got power metal, you got folk metal. I'm talking about new metal. I'm talking elf metal. I'm talking pirate metal. Now we got dwarf metal. We got all these different metals. No, most of those aren't actual like distinct genres. And are you asking me if metal itself is a roguelike? Yes. No, we don't have rogue metal yet. I think that is, it could be something. Definitely pretty synthy.
But does
this is something
does the metal genre suffer from the same similar problem that the rogue genre has of like, we're the OG people, we matter more or whatever?
Yeah, a bit. I've encountered a little bit of pedantry, like aggressive pedantry about what these different definitions are, and I feel like I've experienced it less as the scene has kind of loosened up a bit and gotten a little bit more chiller and more like inclusive and less gatekeepy. And at the end of the day, I mean, like we've been discussing throughout this episode, why are these labels, why are these subgenres useful? It's basically just so you can sort of refine your taste and refine your ability to make recommendations to people and to like have conversations. It's a useful, language tool to have. So like if I, go to a show and I'm like, wow, I really enjoyed, this Camelot show that I went to recently. It's like, well, what subgenre roughly are they? Oh, they're part of symphonic metal. Well, now I can type in symphonic metal to Steam and see what options come up. And Steam, okay, really? I found into Steam or whatever it is. And there you have it. So it's useful, but these labels are useful to have and to have a general working definition, but they don't have to be 100% accurate. I mean, why do we got to get all bent out of shape about it? There's no need to.
Best roguelite metal band name, Permadeath. I don't know why it hasn't. Someone's done that, right?
Great point. Permadeath absolutely should be. Well, actually, I think it'd probably be a death metal band, obviously, because the original death metal band was called Death. So Permadeath.
I wasn't aware of the subgenre.
Or it could be a postmodern post-death metal. I don't know if that's even a genre. But
Permadeath is already definitely a band.
Yeah.
Wait, really? Did you look it up?
If you can read the band name logo, then that's
here we go. We're gonna use Midjourney for that, and
outstanding.
More jagged.
But to answer your question,
here's the SoundCloud.
Scott,
I just posted the SoundCloud for Permadeath in the chat.
Oh, wonderful! I'll check them out. They're probably pretty.
Oh, but it has an A in it. It should be DE.
I did try DE Their tags are terrorcore, speedcore, hardcore, breakcore, Swan 130, pure evil, atmosphere, progressive death metal, Swedish death metal, Swan 105, scar symmetry, speedcore, free download, Gabber, video game, NRW
Free download.
horror.
Free download is my favorite genre, subgenre of metal, that's for sure. So yeah, it's definitely like, it's more of, at this point I would say it's more of a meme in the metal community that like people are really aggressive about this, because I feel like it's pretty rare that I find myself on a serious like life or death conversation about what metal subgenres was.
And do people like stray into like Blind Guardian forums and are like, I'm looking for
I'm looking for other power metal
music, please?
Well, I remember actually, you know what? I remember like 10 years ago getting pretty bent out of shape because I was at a metal festival, and in like the metal festival literature, Blind Guardian was described as a progressive metal band. Like, this is an outrage. They're obviously a power metal band. And then I found out later that was just copy that they had copy pasted from like the Blind Guardian website, and it's like, oh, they define themselves as that. But then you get into a whole, this taps into another topic that we were just discussing, which is like the audience's interpretation of what genre a game is versus what the developers think the genre is. And then you get situations like you were saying with Don't Starve, where the devs came in and decided to just nuke all those tags.
Will, I'll pivot the question over to you. Jazz and jazz fusion. Is jazz fusion a jazz light?
Yes.
Is that a bad thing?
Oh yeah, it's very bad. It is very bad. if it ain't bebop, I don't give a shit about jazz. Are you kidding me?
Traditional jazz likes his jam.
Yeah, traditional jazz, like that's what I'm all about. If it's not between the late 50s and early 60s, then it's just, it don't mean a thing.
Only 4 years of good music ever made.
I mean, you did post that Bill Evans clip from 1970, though, so jazz light.
Bill Evans is an exceptional man, so.
Well, do we want to, have we touched on everything that we want to cover for this topic? Have we solved the problem of roguelike versus light?
Yes. Can we rank the debate?
Yeah. So yeah,
I feel like we need to rank something. Otherwise, the episode's not complete.
Well, we do have preview for the end of the year. We're gonna take all of our top rated games that we've talked about and put them in an elimination bracket, NFL style, because I'm sure the overlap between roguelike game players and NFL listeners is quite a circle there. But we've been putting our games into major categories, and some of these games span multiple categories, but we got to jam them into one because of playoff purposes. So we have, 6 categories of rogue type games that we've talked about so far: deck builders, platformers, solo dev games, something that I've broadly swept under the carpet as squad management games, traditional roguelikes, and sometimes twin, sometimes not shooters, stick shooters, we'll say. Let's see,
1 to 2 stick shooters.
Yeah.
And how are we going to determine the reigning champion? Is this also going to be in like a debate format?
Yeah, I mean, I have it set up so at the end of the year we'll talk through each game versus each game, or the ones that are lined up in NFL seeding order, which is as convoluted as it could be. But yeah, so for this round, this game versus this game, a different game versus a different game, and then whichever one we like better advances.
Exciting.
So to rank something for this episode, let's see, we already have kind of our average rankings for those categories, which with deck builders being the number one by a country mile, you would think traditional roguelikes would be our bottom one so far. Any guesses on which one is lower than traditional roguelikes for categories that we've touched on thus far?
Great
I already forgot all the
question.
categories.
Yeah, let's hear the categories one more time.
Categories
We got
again are
solo dev.
Solo dev.
Yeah, it's gonna be solo.
That's number
Yeah,
one.
solo
Yeah,
dev.
that's gonna
Wait,
be the
that's
bottom
one of
the-
them. It's gonna be
the
that one.
absolute worst one.
Shockingly,
Well,
no.
or it could
Well,
be one with 1,000
Really?
devs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So shockingly, no. Solo dev is our third highest ranked category.
Wow.
Our lowest ranked one, maybe unsurprisingly, are platformer games.
Oh yeah,
Rogue
platformers
games.
are terrible. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, Will's gonna reevaluate that when we get
Holy
to
mackerel.
our Dead Cells episode eventually.
Hey.
But the solo dev one does have the widest range of standard deviations with our ratings. Again, Deck Builder is I think our highest rated one and our one that we most align on. But yeah, for these Fight Club debate episodes, where would we slap this in our 6 categories of things? Are these conversations useful? Did it feel like we walked away with this learning something?
No, I had it solved coming into this, so there was
Okay.
no learning to be had.
Got it.
I don't know how to rank this because normally we rank this relative to other games.
Well, I rank this episode as absolutely number one. I've greatly enjoyed this conversation, and just of all the roguelikes out there, I think the Grog Pod has been my favorite so far. And thank you for inviting me on this.
That's why we
fine
keep
show.
you
It's
around.
always a good old grand old fun old time with the Rogues Gallery here.
Well, actually,
I'm gonna put it at 8 out of 33.
8 out of 30. Oh, 33 episodes. I see. I was gonna say that's a
Well, I don't actually know how many episodes we've done, but
That sounds about right.
I'd say it's like in the upper third of like interest that I felt in the things that I was thinking about.
I will say I do actually have 2 takeaways from this lovely panel that we have here. Andrew's concept of the randomness being like the key in this paradigm, and so that discussion about like that whole genre of things or paradigm of things versus like the linear gameplay that we're talking about, that's very important. And then Colin's distinction of traditional roguelike, I think that would solve a lot of the problems in talking about this stuff. So from now on, though, I'm just going to use the word roguelite because that is actually universally, everything has some degree of roguiness to it. And so you can't go wrong if you just use that term. That's my takeaway.
And I appreciate you, Colin. Colin, let me tell you. The situation. All right, I was trying to play off the fact that I mixed up some names. Will, I appreciate that the fact that you went through and came up with these distinct categories. Again, very useful in defining these things and being able to eloquently discuss all of these various games that we're going over. The 8 elements, I think, are pretty dead on in terms of like what the makeup generally is of these games that we're talking about.
Scott, I'm assuming you're going to post all of this unambiguously correct information that we've created. You're going to post.
Yeah,
it on
I can link that all of our
Grog Pod
nonsense
stuff.
in the I can link all of our nonsense in the show notes. We got an email from our good buddy Davian. I think I'm gonna punt that to a future episode because we're already pretty long in the tooth on this one. And yeah, like I think Joe's thoughts that he provided to us in a lengthy Google Doc probably also good to pepper out through future episodes. But yeah, like I think for me, I walked into this discussion thinking, I hate the word roguelite. It feels inferior, but I think as long as we all all these definitions of stupid things are all personal and community dependent, and if we have the understanding of like, yeah, traditional roguelikes are over here and they can exist in their own separate sphere, that's fine. And like they are also roguelite to some extent because they have a certain percentage of elements that are rogue based. So everything's a roguelite and nothing is, and who cares, and nothing really matters, and we're all dust in the wind. So I'm gonna rank this episode 5 bags of popcorn out of 5.
Ooh.
I think one thing that I came away with was that like a theory of like chocolate adjacency. Like I kept thinking a lot of like cooking recipes related to this stuff. And I was like, okay, Rogue is a plain Hershey's chocolate bar. Cogmind is a fancy Theo's chocolate salted almond 45% milk chocolate bar. Dead Cells is a chocolate cake. Enter the Gungeon is a triple chocolate layered cake with a dusting of cocoa powder on top. Or, you know, or some other like flavor combo of something. And, you know, if you're going, you're like, you know, I'm in the mood for chocolate. You're going to get a whole swath of different options thrown at you. So really, it kind of depends what form of chocolate are you really interested in.
I do not want to see these tags in Steam. I'll tell you that much. I will not know what is going on.
You don't want your Choco posting all up in your Steam tags there. All right.
We're talking about the game that we're going to play for next week too.
Yeah. So yeah, again, dovetailing. We didn't talk about it in the is it a rogue or not game, but yeah, Will has judiciously selected our next game that he's doing the happy dance for. Again, maybe rogue adjacent, roguelite to some extent, but you know, fuck it, we're gonna throw it in because it's our podcast. We can do whatever we want. That's right. Will has picked Cogmind again.
No, woohoo!
Revisit because he loves it.
That's right. Will, not Colin, as I misspoke earlier, has chosen the drum roll. We're all doing a drum roll.
Drum.
Oh, that's on me to say. Rimworld,
yeah, and then the rim shot. Okay, all right.
It's one of 6 10 out of 10 games in existence from my point of view.
Ooh la la!
And I wanted to come back to. I've been wanting to come back to it for the last couple of years because I know they've got a bunch of new DLCs, and because it meets many of the qualities of a roguelite game, being tile-based and having procedurally generated world. You've got a top-down view of things. If you are following lots of characters, but there's lots. There are like 3 characteristics that, like, you know, that's enough. You know, so
whoa. We'll edit this part out.
It's pretty heavy on the. It's like it's a milk chocolate cake. Or no, sorry, not milk chocolate. It's like a white chocolate. It's still chocolate, but like you're starting to stretch the definitions.
Perhaps, but I'm okay with that because it's such a ridiculously great game, and I love talking about it. I love playing it. I'm already 20 hours into my current colony, and so just trying to figure out how the whole ideology stuff works, the kingdom stuff, the biotech. It's all
20 hours.
I'm having kids. I don't know if I like having the kids. I'm going to have a lot of complaints.
We'll get into this next time.
Yeah,
sounds like it's going to be ranking pretty low. No, well, I'm excited to play it. It has a pretty heavy rep and seems.
Oh, you haven't played it?
It's going to be exciting time. No, I have not.
Oh, I wish I were you.
I wish I were you. Cool, exciting times. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we're gonna continue on into year 2 of the Grog Pod, where the roguelike definitions are made up and the ratings don't matter. But if you want to send in your hate mail for why we got all the definitions wrong, you can send that in to grogpodzone@gmail.com is our email. You can at us on the Mastodons, grogpod@gamedev.place. You can find us. And all of these, well, our show notes, all of our data and rankings and Google Sheets and Google Docs and slides and all those things you could ever want are all up on the website at grogpod.zone. Yeah, we'll see you next time for some I was about to say something Rim related and I'm like, well, it's the episode already has an E for explicit on it, so whatever. But well, playing us out from this episode, we've talked a lot about things that are adjacent to Rogue and all that good stuff, and we've talked a lot about colony sims and things like that. And overall, I think we can agree that roguelikes are a mysterious genre, so we'll leave you with the mysterious guitar music from a particularly dwarfy and fortressy game that's kind of helped to push the boundaries of these definitions and explore strange new territories and make this weird world that we're delving into all the weirder and better. So until next week, embark and strike that earth.